So welcome everyone to the next to July's Bitesize webinar for the SFMI. So today we're going to be looking at wellbeing in the workplace, and we're joined today by Louise Watmough from EQUANS. So she will be driving the majority of the presentation today. So just a quick overview of the SFMI for anyone who's not aware, but I think most people have probably attended a few of these already before. So we are the Sustainable Facilities Management Index, and we drive sustainability and responsible business throughout the FM industry, particularly around UK FM. And we believe there's a lot of potential for FMs to deliver a lot of kind of sustainability support both within their own organisations, but also within the organisations that they work in, and within their clients' operations. So like I mentioned, I think we've got quite a lot of slides to go through today, so I'll just introduce Louise. So like I mentioned, Louise is from EQUANS. She's the Health and Wellbeing Manager, and she's going to be talking about the potential beneficial role of positive psychology within the workplace, and how we can use research findings to date, and how positive psychology can be integrated into organisations. So I won't blabber on for too long, and I'll pass over to you, Louise.
Thank you. Okay, I will just share my screen now. Yeah. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay.
Oh, sorry, just before you start, Louise,
yeah.
sorry, just to let everyone know, we've got the Q&A function, which is live throughout this webinar. So if you've got any questions as Louise is talking, please make sure that you put them in the Q&A function rather than the chat box, if that's okay. And then we'll circle back around at the end for a short Q&A. But after
okay, brilliant. Okay, right. There is quite a lot to go through, but I wanted it to be a session that really kind of was useful and thought-provoking. So just what we'll be looking at, we'll be looking at the business case, just starting very quickly looking at the business case, and then the potential beneficial role that positive psychology and solutions focus have in the workplace. And then how we can integrate that into organisations. So it is quite action-packed, and the pace will be quite quick. For that reason, I'm happy to be contacted afterwards, not a problem at all. If anybody has any questions, happy for them to reach out directly to me or via Sophie. So very quickly on the business case, and I'm not going to sort of dwell on this too much because I want to spend on more exciting things, to be honest. But you know, the business case for wellbeing, just looking at wellbeing in the workplace, it's always tended to be reactive. So, you know, we think mental health first aiders, you know, stress risk assessment, and these are kind of, you know, we look at our employee benefits, and that's kind of more like the traditional approach to wellbeing in the workplace that we tend to think of. Why do we do it? Okay, we say, whenever I ask anybody about wellbeing, they'll say it's the right thing to do. You know, whereas we have sort of the safety, we have, you know, strap lines like safety first, zero harm. Actually, with wellbeing is different because we can make a positive impact. We can actually send people home in a better place than they came to work, and that's a wonderful thing as an organisation to be able to do, particularly in the responsible business arena. Of course, we have a legal duty of care under health and safety employment law. We can link it to safety. We can look at costs of business, and we've got absenteeism. But I think what's really useful is to pull on the focus that presenteeism has had over recent years. And you know, even the most kind of conservative model from Deloitte says, you know, it's at 2 to 3 times the cost of our absence, and it costs the UK around £8 billion a year. That's in the Thrive at Work report issued a few years ago. So there's very good business case that we can build for wellbeing. Over and above, of course, it is the right thing to do. So health and wellbeing, and where do we look at now? Today we look at positive psychology and solutions focused. I've just finished a master's paper, research dissertation paper. My final paper was in positive psychology in an organisational setting, looking at current research. But also when we're looking at EQUANS and our health and wellbeing over the last sort of 3 years, that's been combined. So it's been combining positive psychology and something we call solutions focused. So I just thought it'd be useful to give an overview of what they are and how they differ. So if we look at positive psychology, there's a very strong evidence base for positive psychology. It's quite academic in nature, but there's been lots of research done on it, and it's got really sort of good efficacy findings. But it bases around individuals. So it looks at individual strengths and character traits, and it looks at building those. We looked at building individual resilience, individual well-being. That's very much the focus of it. It's based on something called the broaden and build theory and that upward spiral. So although the changes we see in positive psychology are all quite small from that sort of statistical perspective, they're positive but small to moderate effect, but they build over time. So what we see, although we maybe see a small effect immediately after an intervention, 3 months down the line, that has built. So it's become more and more substantial in its reach. And we're all familiar with this principle because we were referred to people being on a downward spiral in life. And this research just proves that actually the same is true in reverse, that if we can set people on an upward spiral, that too builds. So in an organisational context, we can also link that to culture. And the more positive we have, the more people in a positive mindset we have in an organisation, that will result in a more positive culture. And the more negative people, the more people sitting in a negative headspace will result in a more negative culture. And I'll come on to that in a second very quickly, just to illustrate it hopefully a bit better what I mean by that. But then we also have solutions focus. So how is that different? Well, whereas positive psychology is about an individual, solutions focus is on interaction. It's on the interactions between people, the salient aspects of a particular situation, the observable behaviours, and it's finding the resources or exceptions. So, we're looking at solutions, not problems. We're looking at past strengths, how that helped us to overcome, that can unlock a key to moving forward. If we were to look at problem solving in an organisation, rather than looking at, going back over and looking what went wrong, and just doing this all, going right back over to root cause analysis, this is slightly different and looking at actually what would good look like next time? How would we do it right next time? Yeah, what steps would everyone be doing collectively to do it right? And the focus is subtle, but in brain terms and in outcome for business, it's actually quite significant. But it's about taking the direct and simplest route to a solution. So if we take positive psychology, which is the individual, and we take solutions focus, which is more collective interactions between individuals, we can see that actually combining these two approaches offers great potential for preventative well-being in an organisation. So we've got the impacts on the individual, the collective, and then by default that also goes to wider society. And I just pulled off sort of a quote, what is sustainable well-being, to pull on, and one of the research papers came up with sustainable well-being is achieved when we're improving individual well-being, and that's correlated with improving the well-being of other members of society and the natural environment. And I think that very nicely kind of summarises the rationale or the role that combining positive psychology and solutions-focused approach can actually benefit organisations and wider society, and really sort of bring the responsible business into workplace well-being. So I just said I would go over that kind of, when we're looking at, I made the statement about positive culture and negative culture. And it's just very quickly, in a nutshell, probably the quickest chat on neuroscience I've ever done. So essentially our brains, if I was going to go in a nutshell, our brains, we can think that our brains work on pattern matching. So this is just an analogy, but essentially, it's a really valuable analogy to take away. So if we think about how our brains work, we've got the example there of our brains. The nice blue bit is our cortex. That's our sort of rational brain, as we'll call it. That's at the top. That's where we do all our processing. And then in the middle, we've got our little red bit, the very centre, little small bit on that screen, the red bit. That's our amygdala. And all this terminology is becoming more into sort of mainstream media and information. So many of you will have heard of this terminology before, but essentially we can think of it that our amygdala is like a radar. So it's always scanning. It's always scanning, and it's scanning for threats because it's there for our survival. So it's continually scanning. So everything comes in. It comes in through that amygdala, through our primitive mind, that survival mind, and it comes in. And we can think of it as going to our hippocampus. I mean, you think of that as a filing cabinet, just like a filing cabinet. And the hippocampus is one of the key areas of the brain that's involved in memory and learning. And memory is the key bit here, and that's why we're saying we're likening it to a filing cabinet, just for simplicity. So we say, okay, an input comes in, we check the filing cabinet, and then what happens? Well, depending on that filing cabinet record, depending on what our brain throws back, depends on what response our brain puts out to our body. So if it's a negative response, we can think of it as a stress response, and it's survival. So it's cortisol, adrenaline, the stress hormones, and that's through the pharmacist, our hypothalamus. So it comes in through our radar, it goes to the filing cabinet, it says, no, that's a bad experience last time. So because it was a bad experience last time, we expect a bad experience this time. We anticipate it, even with no evidence. We just go on our last memory. And then our brain then releases those chemicals. That's our stress response, our cortisol, etc. However, if it's not a threatening response, if it was a pleasant response last time, we're calm, we're cool, we're collected, we're rational, and we have access, continued access to the more sort of rational part of our brain and our neocortex. So that's essentially, okay, like I said, quickest talk on neuroscience I think I've ever done. So if we look at the language, those two parts of the brain have very different languages. So whereas that fight-flight area of our brain, it's survival. You know, that's what stops us getting hit by the number 79 bus coming down the road towards us. It's there for survival, it's there to keep us alive. But it doesn't know the difference between the tiger back in caveman days, the number 79 bus, or an argument with our boss or our colleague at work. It doesn't know the difference. Our brains work in inputs and they work in chemicals. That's it. This is really, really simple, but it's taking it to that real analogy that's so useful in life. So any input that makes us feel uncomfortable, and we all know that uncomfortable feeling, is going to release that stress response. And the language of that part of our mind tends to be anger, anxiety, depression. Okay, and then if like what the other way, if we have access and continued access to the more rational part of our mind, if the fight-flight isn't needed because we feel safe, there's no threat detected, we are rational, logic, reasonable, and we're actually naturally solutions focused. So if we then sort of take that into the workplace, just to give an example, because there's a direct correlation between line managers and their teams. And now we can see why, can't we? Because if we say, right, this line manager here doesn't look in too much of a good mood, looks like he's giving his team a bit of a hard time, what's that going to be doing to their pharmacist? So, you know, is their pharmacist going to be releasing the happy chemicals that gives them access to that rational, calm, productive place in their mind? Or is that going to get them gripped by that primal, the primitive response, fight, flight, which actually cuts off all access to rationale, logic and reason, which is why we sometimes behave quite irrationally when we're under stress. So this is just, like I said, it's a very whistle-stop tour, but it's just to get us thinking of our actions and communication in the workplace, and thinking in terms of communication and in terms of these brain processes and that brain response. And what this means in culture, so what I said earlier before about bringing that to culture, is that, you know, if we spend, I said we had the upward spiral. So if we have an upward spiral and we have that positivity, and we have, we can encourage, there's things that we can do. So breathing, slowing our breathing down, switches our vagal tone and puts us into the more rational part of our mind. That's a very easy brain hack. mind hack, but and this is where positive psychology is coming from. Positive psychology is very short. The interventions associated with it are very short, 5 minutes long, and they're little interventions that encourage our brain to sit in the more rational, the calm, the safe area, and that's where we can be productive. So the more time we spend there, the more of a habit that becomes, because we're rewiring. Our brains are continually rewiring from the minute we're born to the moment we die. It is possible to rewire your mind, to rewire your brain and your neural pathways throughout your life, no matter how old you get. It is possible. The more ingrained old habits are, it might take longer and be a bit more difficult, but we can still do it. So the more individuals in an organisation we have sitting in the positive part of our mind, the better our culture is going to be as an organisation, because the culture just reflects the mindset of the individuals. So the more people we have sat in survival mode who are stressed and anxious with the cortisol and stress hormones going through, the more that culture will reflect that. And if we think about the language of the primitive mind, firefighting, conflict, negativity, distraction, unproductive, and not always rational. So anything that we can do in the workplace to encourage people to spend more time and to build resilience, just through being aware of that simple analogy on how our brains work, and encouraging people to be in a more brain-friendly place, our actual culture really kind of responds to that. Also, we're sending people home in a more resilient manner. So it's not only the organisational culture that responds to this. Also, if someone goes home, they go home, their family benefit from this. In turn, we all like being around positive energy. It calms us down. What does that do? If we're around positive energy, we're more likely to go into that positive space ourselves, and we have that ripple effect out. So where we have that broaden and build, this is like the ripple effect, and it builds and builds over time. So just like the butterfly effect as well, these things are not significant, and they build. Okay, so what does this mean for us? What can we get out of 15 minutes today, which is, like I said, a challenge to fit all this in, and I really hope this is useful and thought-provoking and kind of making some sense to you in the time we have. But simple steps. So I was thinking, okay, what could I give today to take away from this? And I said, actually, it's a very powerful little analogy, because just knowing that means straight away we can think about what our pharmacist is doing at any one time. But we can also now be aware of what we're doing to other people. So the language that we use, our body language, our tone, if we're being angry, aggressive, confrontational, what's that going to do to that pharmacist and the other person? What are we going to do to their mental state? Similarly, if we've got people who are stressed, how can we help them? And we can be helpful just by using language, by helping them get to a better place. So by using non-confrontational language, by using positive language, by asking them questions, by asking them what solution looks like, by switching their focus to a solution, we're helping them get to a more rational space. So just by that one little slide, that one little analogy, I hope that you can see just how simple. It's free. It's free and it's simple. We can utilise existing touch points to look at meetings, one-to-ones, team meetings, appraisal processes. We're looking, we encourage individual accountability. It's about looking after our own well-being, looking after our own pharmacist, and looking after ourselves, as well as being aware of others, because we can, like I said, breathing, there's things that we can do to look after ourselves. But we can also encourage that line manager accountability and ownership. And this can be as simple, so very, very simple takeaways for today. And I've got a couple that might be useful starting points, because they're the ones that we've received really good feedback on in our business, that are really simple and good tools that other people could use to start something similar. And that is just simple as incorporating reflection activities. And like I've said, however these are incorporated, whether it's kept on an informal basis, it's done via a communication campaign, whether you put them into appraisal processes, all those natural touch points, they're very simple, a couple of moments, a couple of minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, but they encourage people just to take that time to reflect on their well-being and focus on solutions, 3 little things that they could do to improve the areas in their life. And if I just flick on I'll flick on these and go back. But the reflection activities, this is the individual reflection activity that we utilise. And like I said, I've had very good feedback on this. This reflects our strategy, the different elements of our wellbeing strategy. So mental, physical, nutrition, they're all the pillars that we have in our strategy. But those names can be changed. But this just encourages somebody to think about the different areas of their life. And by mapping it out, it naturally shows them in a very simple diagram where their strengths and weaknesses are. And it just means that they can look at trying to get more balance across the piece, because, you know, wellbeing's holistic. We can't have overall well-being if we aren't getting enough sleep, we're not eating the right things. Similarly with line managers, and again, this is one that we've got into in EQUANS, and this is just based around the HSE. So for those of you familiar with the HSE stress standards, this is based on the stress standards, and it's something that line managers can do once a year, every 6 months, every 3 months. You can do it with an individual, you can do it as your team, just as a stock check. Are you doing all those right things, just to encourage that sort of brain health in your teams? You know, are you making sure they're involved in decisions, you give them a sense of control? Are you making sure objectives are realistic? Are you making sure they take their breaks? And all of these are just little things that you can do, that reflection time, and look for ways to just continually improve and to work in more brain friendly ways. And that's how simple it is to get started. You know, at EQUANS, we've built it up. We've got far more complex now. You know, we've developed training. We've got training that's bolted on to go into the work what I covered very, very quickly. We do that in far more detail. We've got some positive psychology activities that we've got in the form of a booklet. But it doesn't have to. It grows organically, and it can be as simple as starting with little activities like this, which was a message I really wanted to get across today. So it's building it. It's starting simple and it's building it up. But the key takeaway from today is just that awareness of what our pharmacists are doing and the impact of our words and our actions on other people. And that's me, Sophie. Any questions?
Hi, sorry, I was just struggling to get myself off mute there.
Okay.
So if I just reshare my screen, thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. I'll just go onto this one. Yeah, I'm sharing now. So yes, thank you very much for that, Louise. That was really interesting. I'm just aware, obviously, there was a lot of stuff to get through, so we've only got a little bit of time now just for a couple of questions. But I think one of the main questions that I think we'd like to kind of cover off would be for those organisations who are just starting to embark on a kind of sustainability and wellbeing journey. What would you say your kind of top 3 recommendations would be for, you know, what they should kind of be focusing on first to do with wellbeing?
Yeah, and I think that's what, hopefully I tried to kind of pull that into the presentation a little bit. But I think it's, you know, it's easy to get intimidated or daunted, you know, and I showed the slide of just how ours has grown with EQUANS, but it's taken 3 years to do that, and we had to start somewhere. And it starts just with that strategy, determining, you know, because it all comes from that strategy. So for us, we used the business in the community work well model, and then we kind of added into it what felt right for us, and then that forms the basis of that strategy, of those pillars of how you look at your objectives. But it's starting simple, and I think this is the message. You know, if you start too complicated, if you try to achieve too much, you'll end up achieving nothing. And actually, it's understanding that very small steps can be incredibly powerful, and that was what I wanted to get across today. You know, we start thinking about the ripple effect, the butterfly effect. You know, there's truth in those, and there's evidence to support it. Very small actions can have quite big impact. And so my starting point would literally be the reflection activities we did today, and just thinking that, taking that time to reflect about your wellbeing strategy, what you want to achieve as an organisation. But if you're looking at building in more preventative, you can't beat starting with simple, which is the reflection activities.
Absolutely. Cool, brilliant. And then I guess one other quick question would be maybe around the kind of key challenges faced, particularly around obtaining data, because I know that's one thing that a lot of companies have commented on over the years throughout the SFMI assessments, and that's something that I think a lot of people have come back and said, you know, we struggle with gaining access to the data, or having people, so, you know, if you have questionnaires being sent out throughout the organisation, not having very good response rates and things like that. So what would you say are the kind of key challenges that you faced around the data side, and what have you been able to do to kind of address those?
Yeah, okay, and like any organisation, yeah, we struggle to get data, and I think, you know, there's a lot of, you know, 15,000 people, 14,000 people, and you know, so many different areas of focus in the business, and so many people wanting data. You know, so many surveys going out, and, you know, in the annual survey only having, like, you know, maybe 3 questions on wellbeing, it can get quite difficult. You know, what I did in EQUANS was set up health and wellbeing survey based on the Department for Work and Pension question set. That is kind of it's a standardised question set for subjective wellbeing, workplace wellbeing. I've got those that sit on the health and wellbeing portal, and, you know, I promote it periodically through campaigns, just to try and, almost like a pulse check, just to try and guess. And it doesn't matter, not everybody has to fill these in. We get hung up thinking, you know, but actually it's just a dip test, and it just tells you over time whether things are changing. It's not getting so hung up in data as well. You know, sometimes we think we won't do anything because we haven't got the data, and then we get hung up on the integrity of the data. But it's just there to, you know, there's always going to be questions. I mean, you know, we had the discussions internally, you know, absence data. Okay, well, is every absence reported? Is every absence reported accurately? Is it in the right bucket? You know, and you start to, and very quickly with data, you can pull it to pieces, you know. So it's not getting so hung up on it, and just trusting that, you know, with something like wellbeing, you're looking at culture, and that's maybe far bigger. So you will see it, but all these things take time. If you're looking for an instant in your absence figures, you know, you may be doing it for the wrong reasons. So it's going in with that solid business case to really get people to buy into a long term on wellbeing, rather than getting caught in short term data. I'm not saying data isn't important or it's not valuable. It's just, you know, being realistic, it shouldn't get in the way or be a reason not to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, fabulous. Well, thank you very much for that. I think that's probably all the time we've got for questions for today. But if anyone's got any kind of additional questions, then please do make sure that you send them either across to myself or Louise, and we'll make sure to get back to you on those. So just a very last thing, just to finish off the webinar today. So just some bits that are going to be coming up from the SFMI that you can be looking out for. So we are aiming to release our updated 23 criteria report for this year, following the Leaders Forum that we had recently. So our current one is already on the website, if that's something that you guys want to have a look at. It's just a brief breakdown of 1 page per 23 criteria, and it just kind of delves into a bit of an overview of each of the criteria and how it affects FM and what can be done to improve it. Then we've also got the annual assessments, which are kicking off at the moment. We've just started on the desktop assessments, and we will be providing the feedback from those to each of the partners next month. And then obviously following that, in September and October, we've also got our the actual in-person audit, or usually now remote audits, which will be kicking off then, and then working up towards the awards at the end of November. And also in September, we've got the Scope 3 Stage 2 project, which will be kicking off as well. But I think that's generally it for us from the SFMI. We've got no webinar next month, just because of the way that holidays work and lots of people taking annual leave. So there's a break next month, but then we'll be back in September. So keep an eye out on our social media, and we'll also send out plenty of emails as well, reminding you to sign up. So I think that's it from me. And if there's anything else from yourself, Louise, then I think
I think we're on time. We fitted it in.
Perfect. Oh, well, I think, let me just check. Yeah, that is it from us. So thank you all very much for attending. And hopefully we will see you all again in September.